Welcome to release 8 of my Rhythmic knit along. This is the final week of the knit along and we'll be adding the finishing touches to our blanket or cushion. So if you're knitting the blanket, what we'll be doing is sewing up our squares, picking up the edges and knitting a nice neat garter stitch border. If you're knitting the cushion, you'll also be sewing up the squares and there's an option to add the zip, which is great for washing. So you'll be learning a few tips and techniques this week through tutorials to help you along the way, and this will include sewing up squares that have different tensions. It will also include picking up the edges of your garter stitch border and showing you how to increase to make these sort of edges. And then finally it will be sewing in the zip of the cushion. Now that we've knitted all our squares, we can begin to join our blanket and cushion together. In our pattern we have a diagram for the blanket and cushion where each square relates to a release. You can use this or feel free to place the squares wherever you would like. So we're going to begin by sewing up our squares. We will be sewing up along the sides, along the cast on and cast off edges. And first I'll demonstrate how to sew along the sides. Now because our stranded colour work squares have 38 rows and our intarsia squares have 40 rows, I'll be demonstrating how we're going to skip a few rows in an intarsia pattern so we can join them nice and evenly. To join our panels together, you will need a tapestry needle with your yarn. I'm using a contrast shade to demonstrate, but I'd recommend that you use a colour that's used in the square. So to join these squares together, I would use this cream shade here. Now to sew up our seams, we are going to be sewing along the columns of the stitches. So here we can see that one of these V's is a stitch. So if we look vertically down, that will be one column, and then we have another column here. So what we want to do is go to the edge of our work and find that column right at the edge here, and then our second column would be here. So when we're sewing our seams together, we are going to be sewing between the stitches here, and these are our horizontal bars that we're going to be working with. Now to join our seams together, we're going to be working at the bottom first, and then we'll work up. To join our squares together, I'm going to insert my needle underneath my right side panel on the cast on edge, leaving a tail to sew in our ends here. Then to join the panels together, I'm now going to insert my needle underneath the left side. Now we're going to form a figure 8. So I'm going to go back into my right side panel and insert my needle through where we inserted it before. And now when we pull these together, our figure 8 is there and it's been joined. Now we can start working up the side of our work. So I'm going to start with my left side. So we're going to find those horizontal bars now. So when you pull across your work, I'm just going to find that first bar there at the bottom. Insert my needle underneath it and pull it through. You don't have to pull it too tightly to begin with. Now we're going to go onto the right side, pull our work again, find that bar and insert it the same way. Now we'll repeat that on our left side. So find that bar, insert underneath and pull through. In the left side, find that bar, insert it underneath and pull through the top. And once you've done a few stitches, you can start pulling your work together and your seams join, and you won't be able to see that stitch in between. So as I said, there's more rows with our intarsia panels than there is with our stranded colour work. So we need to work roughly to about 15 rows, and then we're going to skip on this side. So I'll demonstrate how we do that now. Now that I've sewn up roughly 15 rows, I'm going to skip a row on this side now. So to do this, all we need to do is find those bars again, and instead of going through one, we'll go through two on our left side on the intarsia panel and pull through, and then we carry on as we were before, going through one horizontal bar. And we'll have to repeat that once more and in another 15 rows, and then we will be able to evenly sew up our seams. Now that we've sewn up our side seams, we'll just finish it off by joining them at the top. So we'll finish our last few bars. And now we're going to repeat what we did at the bottom and form a figure 8. This time I'm going to insert from the top of the work underneath, and again on the other side on that cast off edge I'm going to insert my needle through the top, underneath, back to the right side, and now we've sealed at the top and we can sew in our ends down the side seam. To work across our top and bottom edges, we're going to be working in between the stitches and around the stitches. So if we look at our work, one stitch is a V. So you can see there are two legs on the V here. So what we'll be doing is working in between a stitch and around what we call these two legs. So we're going to be starting working right to left, and we'll be starting on the bottom panel here. Now when we look at our work, I'm going to be working below the cast off edge, so on this row here, just making it a neater side seam. And on the top of the work, I'll be working just above the cast off edge along this row we can see here. So I'll be starting working at the back of my work in the first stitch. So I'll insert my needle underneath the work through that first stitch in between the two legs, bringing my work up and leaving a tail to sew in later. Now I'll join the two panels together. So I'm going to find my first stitch on that row here, insert my needle between the two legs and pull through. Now we'll go back into that first stitch underneath, and that creates one stitch. Now we're going to work towards our left, so I'm going to go back under my work and insert my needle into the next stitch along that row underneath between the two legs. And now going to work on the stitch next to there, and we're going to go between the two legs,
around the two legs. Just say
around the two legs, back into that stitch below, and then we'll move to the next stitch. And again, around the two legs, back into that stitch below that we've just come through, and then we'll go to the next stitch underneath and through the work. As we now need to lose 5 stitches on our stranded colour work square, every 5 stitches, I'm going to skip one stitch at the bottom. So working as we have done, when I go underneath, I'm just going to skip this stitch and go to the next one between the two legs. And we'll do this roughly every 5 or 6 stitches that we complete, so that we have them evenly joined at the end. Now we have worked to the end of the cast on and cast off edges. Now you can weave in your ends. I'm going to be demonstrating how to pick up your edges for the blanket along the side of your panels and along the top edge and bottom edges. For the blanket, you may want to use a longer circular needle, as down the sides you'll be picking up quite a few stitches along your blanket. So we'll be working along the columns to begin with. I'll demonstrate first how to pick up the sides, and we'll be working again between the stitches, so we can see one stitch here and one stitch here, and we'll be working again between those horizontal bars between the stitches. So we want to find the first stitch at the edge of our work, and we'll be picking up the horizontal bars in between your first stitch and your second stitch. In the pattern, we see that approximately you'll have to be picking up 32 stitches per square. So as we have 38 stitches here, again we'll be skipping a few stitches in between. So to begin, we're going to insert our needle in between the first stitch and the second stitch at the bottom of your work. Then grab your yarn that you'll be knitting your edges with, wrap it around your needle and pull it through, and that's our first stitch. We're then going to find that bar here, and what we want to do is insert our needle above that bar into the next stitch above. So we're going to go again through the top of our work and knit one stitch by wrapping our yarn around the needle and pulling it up to the right side of our work. And continue like that, going above those horizontal bars each time to pick up a new stitch. Now approximately every 6 stitches we pick up, we'll want to skip one of those bars here. Every 6 rows we would like to skip one of these bars. There's 1 bar, 2 bars, and we'll go into that stitch above the 2 bars, and we've skipped a stitch, so we can evenly have 32 stitches picked up along the edge. Now I will demonstrate how to pick up our stitches for our garter stitch border along the cast off edge. To do this, I'm going to use a circular needle again and grab my yarn for my garter stitch border. So we'll be inserting our needle between a stitch. So here we see a stitch, and we'll be inserting our needle between the stitch here, between the 2 legs, to pick up our stitches. So I'm going to start and work right to left. And to do this, we'll be picking up 32 stitches again across each square. We have 37 stitches here, so again we'll be skipping roughly every 6 or 7 stitches, so we can have 32 stitches evenly across each panel. So I'm going to find our first stitch and insert my needle through to the back of the work from the top of the work, through the 2 legs, wrap my yarn around my needle and pull up. I'll then go into my next stitch along between the 2 legs, wrap my yarn, and that's another stitch. So we continue going between 2 legs to each next stitch 6 times, so until we have 6 stitches. And now that I have 6 stitches, I'm going to skip this stitch we have here and go in between the 2 legs of that next stitch, and then continue going into each next stitch for the next 6 stitches. And that is how we pick up our stitches on our cast on and cast off edges. And now we have our 32 stitches picked up along each square. We can turn our work to start knitting our garter stitch border. When we are knitting our garter stitch border for the blanket, on every right side row we are going to increase at each edge. I'll demonstrate now how to make one. So first we are going to knit the first stitch on the row. Now we are going to make one. So when we see our work, between our stitch on our right hand needle and our left hand needle, there is a horizontal bar. We're going to pick up that horizontal bar, inserting our right needle underneath that bar through the front, and I'm going to pick it up and position it on my left needle as if it is a stitch. Now I'm going to knit into the back of the work here as if to knit. And that's how we make one stitch. And now we knit to the end of the work and we repeat that. So we knit until we have 1 stitch left on our left needle. Now that I have knit to the last stitch on the row and I have 1 stitch left on my left needle, we are going to find that bar again in the middle of your work and make 1 stitch. So I'm going to pick up from the front and place it on my left needle there. Now I'm going to knit the stitch from the back of the work, so I'm going to insert my needle at the back and knit that 1 stitch. And now we can knit the last stitch, and we've made 2 new stitches on the row. If you have chosen to knit the cushion, you have the option to sew in a zip. So once you've sewn your 6 front pieces together and your 6 back pieces together, we can place a zip on the cast on edges to finish it. To do this, we are going to get some pins and pin the zip to the middle of the work. So we have the teeth of the zip against your cast on edge. You'll then need a sewing needle and some thread a similar colour to your work. And if you knot the end of your thread to secure it, we are then just going to insert it at the back of our work behind the zip and just below the cast on edge, and then we are going to form just a back stitch along the zip to secure it in place and back for both the front and the back piece of the cushion. And this is how it looks, nice and neatly finished. I hope you enjoy finishing your project. Don't forget to share your final pieces in our Row and Connect Make Along group on Facebook. Bye for now.